Well, welcome to this conversation, this Dreaming with God podcast. Really glad you're here. Just thought maybe as we're in this series of dreaming, what would it look like to have a couple conversations with people, all different walks of life and faith, and that have experienced dreaming with God and having a plan, a calling from Him, and walking in that. So hopefully these conversations are helpful for you as you discern how God is leading you in these spaces. And so want to introduce you to my friend, Kathy Wainberg. If maybe you met Kathy, if you're part of Journey, maybe you're watching this, you're not part of Journey. Kathy, maybe just give yourself a little bit of like introduction, help people understand who you are and family and that kind of stuff. And
Great.
then
Okay.
looking forward to all we get to chat about.
Sure. Well, again, Kathy, and I'm married to my husband, Jack, and this year we celebrated 40
Wow.
years. Yeah.
4-0.
Pretty,
4-0.
yeah, very cool. And we have 4 children, and 2 of them are married, and then 2 of them are not. And we have 5 grandchildren. 4 of the grandchildren are boys, and they live close to us, but the one is Kenna, and she lives way out in Montana. So
Whoa.
I know, we just don't get to see
Too
her
far.
enough.
Too
Yeah,
far.
too far.
Did I
Too far.
see you had a pickleball tournament the other week in the driveway or something?
Did you see
I saw a
that?
picture somewhere on Facebook.
Really?
Or
Is
Instagram
that
or
right?
something.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, we finally got our driveway paved
Okay.
after it much needed, and we thought, wow, this should be big enough for a
Yeah.
pickle tournament
There
or
it
a
is.
pickleball at
Yeah.
least, because we really don't know what we're doing.
No.
So
No.
we ordered a net and we got the
I love it.
pickleballs. And so in the evening, when it cools off a little bit, Jack and I get out there and hit it back and forth.
That's
But
awesome.
the grandkids were over the other day, and we had a pickleball tournament with them.
Wow.
They were pretty good.
So
for
professional, semi-pro, pickleballer,
yeah, well, let's not even
mother,
go that
grandmother, all the things. All the things.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well, Kathy, thanks for being willing to share
Yeah.
some of how Jesus has led and used you in the past, and also excited to talk about some things He's leading you in today. Give people just a window into your story of meeting Jesus. Like, how did you encounter Jesus and begin a relationship with Him for the first time? What did that look like in your story?
Oh, wow, that's a full story. I grew up in Southern California, was there during the time when the whole hippie movement started, and really because of not having a relationship with the Lord, and certainly not making right decisions. It's only by the grace of God that I am here today.
That's awesome.
And my story is really about one very, very lost girl and how God's great compassion came and sent somebody into her life that was willing to take a risk on her. And I and my friend ended up being part of this whole truth-seeking culture. Decided we were going to go on adventures ourselves, and her and I hitchhiked around the Western United States, and
was this like college?
Well,
high school?
when I
What was this period of
graduated
time in
from
your life?
high school, I started getting involved in a lot of this counterculture when I was in high school, and then when I graduated from high school, I went to college, and then I dropped out. And when I dropped out, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go and find out
Figure it
what
out.
is really true.
Yeah.
I'm going to figure
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah.
I'm going to find some place that is a Shangri-La where people are authentic and life is real,
Yeah.
and I can find my purpose
Yeah.
in life. And of course, that
Which is not a bad desire.
no,
right?
not bad at
Yeah.
all.
No. Yeah. Just
But
trying to sort it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that took me into a lot of false religions. And at that time, it was Eastern religion, meditation, Mahari Mesha yoga, all of that type of, finding a nirvana, finding a higher plane, and so got involved in that, and of course the whole thing with drugs and everything else, and so. Ended up in a little town called Du Bois, Wyoming. And I was thinking, this is the perfect place. There's only 900 people, beautiful setting.
Yeah.
You are on Highway 26, and if you keep going, you'll end up in Teton National Forest.
Yeah.
So thinking, nature, this is it. The only problem with moving places and going, thinking that you're going to start a new life is that you keep bringing you along, and that was my problem as I brought me in. I was really confused and messed up, and but thinking that I had it all together in some form.
Yeah.
So when I got there. I thought, well, I need to find a job. And so I walked down the street, and there was a cafe there, and Du Bois doesn't even have a stoplight. And it was the local coffee mill. And I went in, and the woman that was standing behind the counter looked at me, and I was really a sight at that time, I'm sure, because I was the true hippie, the hair.
Is this fresh off the road trip?
Yeah. The hair, the clothes, and Du Bois is a cowboy town, and I don't think they were quite ready for me in there. And I walked in there, and the woman looked at me, and I said, "Hey, do you need any help? I'm looking for a job, and just moved in." And she looked at me again, and then she said, "Yeah, why don't you come in tomorrow?" And I thought, well, great. I was pretty happy.
Yeah.
Well, later I find out that her husband came up to her afterwards and said, "Why in the world did you hire that girl?"
Yeah.
And she said, "God told me." So that was my adventure of working with Vivian. And Vivian was the most amazing woman.
Wow.
She loved the Lord, and anybody that walked into that cafe, she knew or that God sent her to her. So I started working for her, and one day she was kind of tricky. She said, "Kathy, I forgot my glasses, and I always read the Bible in the morning. Would you mind reading to me?" And I said, "Oh, sure, I can read to you." So it was a quiet time in the cafe, and so she picks up the Bible, and I'm reading to her, and it was I can remember it so well. It was in 1 Timothy, and it was the 4th chapter, and it's talking about, and this is the King James version. I remember it. Refusing to eat the meat that God has so freely given you, and that He provided. And I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting, because I was a vegetarian at the time, and there's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian. But the reason that I was a vegetarian was because I thought it would make me holy. It had nothing to do with health. It was just this whole culture thing. And then later on in that passage, it says, "Bodily exercise profiteth little." And then that was part of my regimen too, was doing certain spiritual yoga exercises to get closer to the Lord. And I thought, isn't this interesting? This book is addressing something that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So it just kind of piqued a curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you think of evangelism, that is the last scriptures that you would be using.
Yeah.
But, isn't it amazing how God knows?
Yeah.
And He cares, and He he just drops these seeds.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
so, Vivian, again, she was very open about her faith. She was always talking about Jesus, and I grew up in a home that was religious, but my Jesus wasn't personal. And so it was curious.
Mhm.
She was curious to me, and
Mhm.
and people would come in and ask her to pray for them, and in the morning there would be all the guys from town that would come in there and have coffee before they would go to work, and she'd always be preaching to them. And it was sometimes it was a good thing. A
Yeah.
lot of times it wasn't so good
Yeah.
because they would get mad at her.
Wow.
But that would not, but they always came back. And so one day she said, "Hey, would you want to go to church with me?" And they didn't have a church building. They didn't have a church. Uh, it was more like a small group. And so when she said, "Do you want to go to church with me?" I was still partying, and I was just tired. And I thought, well, if I can go to church with her and I can get paid for it, and I can just sit there
Yeah.
and just numb out, then I'm going. So
Mhm.
I said, "Yeah, I'll go to church with you." Well, the church was the telephone office at that time,
Wow.
and it was a small room, probably about this size, and they had maybe 10 people that were there, and a pastor from Jackson Hole came over,
Mm.
and all the people were at least twice my age, because at the time I'm, probably about 18, 19 years
Mm.
old.
Mhm.
And they started singing, and they had hymnals. And when they started singing, um, they were so bad. They could not carry a
Yeah.
tune. It was just
Yeah.
pathetic, and I'm thinking, "Well, this is really bad." And when they were singing, but they were singing with such zeal
Mm.
and joy that again, I just thought, "Wow, these people must have something to
Mm.
sing that bad
Mhm.
and be so happy."
Yeah.
And then the pastor spoke, and when the pastor spoke, I can't tell you what he said, but it was like laser beams going
Wow.
into my heart.
Wow.
Like, this is truth.
Mm.
This is truth. And
Yeah.
when you that whole the hippie movement, a lot of it was what is true. You
Mhm.
grew up and most of them were culturally grew up in probably successful
Mm.
families, and found the emptiness
Yeah.
of this,
Yeah.
and not having anything really
Mhm.
to cling on to.
Mhm.
And
Wow. That's
so
awesome.
so that just really, started going to church, um, living kind of this double life, going to church, living the same way, and becoming very, very confused and empty. And so one night I just got down on my knees. I was home by myself, and I said, "Okay, God, if you love me like these people tell me that you love me, then you have got to show me somebody my own age that's been through what I've been through,
Mm.
that you have forgiven." And I was pretty desperate, and I ended up crying
Mm.
myself to sleep
Mm.
that night. And uh, the next day, I went to work, and when I went in I was waiting on people, and there was a young man that I had met at the bar previously, and he said to me, "Hey, Kathy, you're from California," and I go, "Yeah," and he goes, "Hey, my dad and I are flying back to California tomorrow. Do you need a ride?" And Dubois was a town where people would fly into to go fishing
Mm.
and hunting, and so him and his dad had their private plane, and
Wow.
they had flown in, and they had been fishing, and he just threw that out there, and I thought, "Well, sure, I'd love to fly back to California."
Mm.
So talked to Vivian, who owned the restaurant, and said, "Hey, I have a chance to fly back to California." So the next day, I was flying back to California, and I got home, and through again, a series of God's circumstances, I ended up at a friend's house. And when I walked in there, these were friends that I had been involved with for quite a while. Same lifestyle,
Mm.
same everything.
Yeah.
And here they were, they were living in this house that in San Bernardino. And I thought, oh, great, I'll get to go over and see them. And I went in there, and there was just something different,
Mm.
something different. And John Miller, who owned the house at the time, as I came in, he goes, "Oh, yeah, it's so good to see you." He says, "I've been praying for everybody that I graduated with."
Mm.
And I'm thinking, John Miller is praying? I mean, John Miller was the ultimate surfer. I mean, the blonde hair, the Volkswagen bus, the surfer at beach all the time. And you're thinking, John Miller's praying? And then he started telling me about all of these things that God has been doing in his life. And, it was so,
Yeah.
just so bizarre. And then another friend of mine that I had known came over to the house too, and he started sharing about how Jesus had changed his life. And as I'm sitting there listening to this heavy, warm
Wow.
blanket just felt
Wow.
like it came over me. And I heard a voice, and it wasn't audible. No one else heard it, but I heard it, and it said, "Kathy, here's somebody
Mm-hmm.
who is the same age as
That's what
you,
you asked for. Yeah.
that's been through what you've been
Yeah.
through. What are you going to do?"
Mm.
And it was like, I just said yes.
Mm-hmm.
When I said that, it was this melting, warm liquid
Mm-hmm.
poured through me.
Powerful.
And all of that junk, all of that darkness, all of that was just washed
Mm-hmm.
out of me.
Mm-hmm.
I was clean.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
was free.
Yeah.
I found truth.
Wow.
I mean, I just knew. I knew I met Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I wanted to do was to call Vivian,
Mm.
because she kept telling me about her Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And her Jesus was way different than the Jesus that I knew, because
Yeah.
her Jesus was alive. And so I called her, and I said, I go, Vivian, and she says, what? She says, I know Jesus.
Mm.
I know Jesus. And oh my goodness, she was so excited for
Mm-hmm.
me. She was so
Mm-hmm.
excited for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that I ended up going back to Du Bois, which I ended up living there for 10 years. But when I got back there, and I have to bring this part in because it's just so powerful as a young Christian. Here I am in a town where I was really probably one of the only single people, or that young person that was a believer, and and everybody knows one another in that town. It was quite small, and so I get back there, and I'm working that day, and oh man, I'm just so happy. I'm pouring coffee for everyone, and it's in the morning, and it's all the locals that meet there in the morning. And Vivian comes from out of the back because she was cooking, and I was waiting tables, and she pounds on the counter. She goes, "Hey, hey, everybody!" And I'm thinking, "Oh, great, Vivian's going to say something," because she's always had something to say. And she looked at me, and she said, "Kathy,
Uh-oh.
tell them what happened."
Uh-oh.
And here I am, brand new in
Yeah.
the Lord.
Yeah.
And here is this whole audience of people that I know,
Mhm.
and they know me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like one of those pivotal times where either you're going to jump in and follow the Lord, or you're going to shrink back. And, I just knew, I mean, I found the answer. So So that was when I started
cool.
telling, you know,
Yeah.
I just really told them my experience. And I'm so thankful, even though that was a hard situation, it it gave me the freedom that and the accountability that, okay, people know who you are now. They know what you've been living, and
Yeah.
now you're saying a Christian. So you need to live it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy
Mm-hmm.
because I lost a lot of friends, and there was a lot of really lonely times. But the Lord was so faithful
Mm-hmm.
in providing everything I needed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's beautiful. That's
yeah.
yeah, that's powerful. One thing I was thinking as you were saying that, and even that encounter, like the first dream God has for us is to be
Mm,
with us.
yes,
You know, that's his first
yes.
calling is that we would align ourselves with him and his
Mm-hmm.
grace and how he
Mm-hmm.
sees us. And yeah, just you sharing that. It's so powerful.
Yeah, yeah.
What was, out of that, you said you lived there for 10 years.
Yes.
Like, what were some of the steps? Like, I'm changing, I'm growing this relationship with Jesus. Like, were there some pivotal voices or experiences that kind of had you say, like, what does this mean for my future? Like,
Right, right,
your whole pursuit of your life really had changed.
right.
How did that start to impact how you saw the future in terms of vocation and where you're going to live and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, describe some of those
Mm-hmm.
experiences or that process of how meeting Jesus, having that powerful encounter started to shape, where am I heading in life? What am I doing here?
So the first part of my Jesus journey was being mentored by
Mm-hmm.
Vivian and the other people that were in that small church
Yeah.
that they loved on me,
Mm-hmm.
they encouraged me. I had friends back in California, the friends that were, were now in the Jesus movement.
Mm-hmm.
During this time, uh, the small church we were part of needed to have a Sunday school teacher, and so here I was, and so I started a Sunday school, and my so when it came to dreaming, my dream at that point was just to share with others what Jesus had done for me
Yeah.
because I knew he was the answer.
Yeah.
I became pretty isolated from people that were my age. I mean,
Yeah.
I had mentors, but I didn't have
Yep.
anybody to hang with,
Yep.
and so I had friends that were still showing up and saying, "Hey, Kathy, why don't you go to us to the bar?" Or why don't you? And I just knew that I could not do that
Mm-hmm.
because it would have been too hard for
Mm-hmm.
me
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
And one evening, I just called out to the Lord and I said, God, I want to serve you, but I can't, I'm just not strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like I'm just being so pulled. And, uh, and I just got on my knees and called out to God. And I just felt God's presence moved into my life in such a powerful way. And I don't know if that's what you call the baptism of the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit
Yeah.
or but there I had an experience
You
that
felt.
night
Yeah.
where I felt a power of God in me that I had never felt
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gave me this whole new zeal
Mm-hmm.
that I'm with you, I'm here for you, I'm what you need, and I'm going to carry you through.
After
During
that.
that time, I would go back to California every, once a year, maybe for a month, visit family, and
Mm-hmm.
then come home. And when I would do that, I would go to these gatherings and be with you know all these Jesus people. And at one of those gatherings is when I received my call for ministry.
Mm.
And it was very strong. I felt the Lord saying, "I want to use you in a full-time
Yeah.
vocational ministry." And so I said yes, and ended up coming back. I was Du Bois, and while I worked and to me that was full time ministry. I mean, I worked at the restaurant, but I lived, ate, and breathed. Um, you know, being able to share Jesus
Yeah.
with people,
Yeah.
and also it was a beautiful part of the country, and I loved it. I
Yeah.
loved it. Um, but where I ended up leaving is I met Jack and my husband, and we really became involved in ministry together there at uh, in Du Bois. And then he asked me to marry him, and I struggled with that because of a call that I had, and in the church that I was at the time, they believed that if you married somebody who had been divorced, then you couldn't be in ministry.
Mm.
So it was this back and forth
Wow.
and back and forth.
Yeah.
And so it just took a lot of praying and seeking the Lord and in the Word saying, God, I don't want to go against you, but I mean, I feel like you have brought Jack in my life, and what do we do with this?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, he moved. He's from Michigan. He's from here. He moved back to Michigan, and I moved to California, and we kept back and forth. And then after
Like texting,
yeah,
email.
well, there wasn't
direct messages.
there wasn't texting.
Snapchat.
No. It was long distance phone calls,
Yeah.
and it was expensive
That's
then.
it. Yeah.
And so Jack and I, we got married. We got married in California, and then we ended up moving back here to Michigan. So I started working at KCC, and as when I started working there, a couple people came up and said to me, one of them being a pastor, well, both of them being pastors, saying, "Have you ever thought about going into full time ministry?" And I thought, well, yeah, I did at one time,
Way
but
back,
yeah, way
years
back
ago.
then,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's that's not part of the picture now. Well, it one of the pastors said, "Well, there's this program that the Wesleyan Church does for adults. It's adult classes, and you can go back and get your ministry license." And I thought, well, that's nice to know, but I'm not interested.
Yeah, it's great for someone else.
Yeah. I'm pretty busy.
Yeah.
And but it just kept rising up. It kept coming into the conversation, and it just kept. I feel like sometimes when the Lord is really trying to direct me, it's like a ball that you try to hold underwater. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And then it pops up here, and it pops up here,
Yeah.
and it pops up here, and it just
It's
kept,
like the Corinthian scripture, I think, right? It says the callings of God is irrevocable.
yeah.
Like revoke, irrevocable,
You're gonna- yeah.
revoke. Yeah, it just keeps coming up.
It
Yeah,
just kept rising, and
Yeah.
so finally, just to say yes, I decided, okay, I'll take one of these classes, and I took a class, and I loved it. I mean, it was
Do
all
you remember what
about.
the class was?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But it was, it was being in the Word, which I love
Yeah.
getting in the Word, and it's about being around other people of like mind, and just growing in my faith, and so that started my journey. I mean, Jack and I, we prayed about it. We said, okay, is this something for us? And Jack's always been so supportive, and he was really supportive. But I really needed to get an answer from the Lord, and that this is what
This is the
because
right
this
thing.
is going to take time and energy, and it's going to be hard, Lord. And when it gets hard, I want to know you're in it.
Yeah.
And I didn't just make this up.
Yeah.
And it was interesting when I was seeking the Lord and on that, the Lord had just it wasn't even a Christian article. It was just an article in a magazine that the Lord had me read. It fell into my lap somehow. And it was about the tsunami that happened and how it came upon the town so suddenly, and how so many people that were in boats that were way out there were drowning, and there were boats that were really far out that weren't helping the people. But there was one family that had a yacht, and they saw all these fishermen that had their boats had collapsed, and they just kept grabbing these
Mm.
fishermen out of the water, and their boat was just full of all these fishermen that would have drowned. And and the Lord spoke to me and said, you know, you can be out there in that boat just watching and being safe, or you can be in the front
Mm.
lines saving people
Yeah.
that are drowning.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, God, then I'm in,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what really clarified that call at that stage of life, because I was in my 40s
Mm-hmm.
at that
Mm-hmm.
time, and I didn't get licensed until I was in my 50s. And then I got ordained. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
during that time, I was working in the church and held a lot of the responsibilities, but
It's a process.
it was a process.
Yeah. So when you got into that more upfront ministry role, what was kind of the gist of that? Like, what was your primary role when you were
Well,
serving in that
I
leadership?
discipleship. I was over small groups. My title was the New Life Pastor. So what my position was is when people came to the church, is making sure they were greeted well, and so the greeting and the ushering, and then when people came to faith, and also prayer when people came to faith, is making sure they were discipled, followed up with Bible
Mm-hmm.
study, and then over small
So
groups
seeing
also.
that whole
Yeah,
process.
that
Yeah.
whole process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
It.
it changed at different times. I mean, you know, things change in church. I know,
Yeah.
you know, your labels change,
Yeah.
and you know, just
They're just
moves.
titles.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
One thing that's cool is, you know, picturing that role, um, all the way back to Du Bois,
Yes.
that room of, you know, 10 people.
Mhm.
That's where, you know, that kind of started.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
however many years later, you're creating those spaces
Yeah.
for other people.
Yes.
It's just
Yeah.
cool,
Yeah.
full circle thing. So, Kathy, you're not old. You are seasoned, more seasoned than
Seasoned.
I.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for
Yes,
that seasoning.
there it is.
A little spicy.
How are you are no? How are you continuing to hear and dream from God?
Well, you know, I think that the dream has always been this heart for people to know the truth, and for the truth to set them free, to know Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And just and I am continually growing and knowing
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I am still so hungry for God.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
So the dream is that God would use myself and my husband and our family to be able to share that news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, to share that Jesus is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's the answer to and you know, I know we live in a very culturally confusing time, but I think he can figure it all out if we let him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he has a
Mm-hmm.
path for us, and so at least we can be part of that path for someone to meet him. And then we let him do the work,
Mm-hmm.
and we encourage them and disciple them.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's our dream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you would encourage those listening or watching with as they, yeah, maybe grow in their walk with God, as they discern what the future looks like, as
Yeah.
they maybe are trying to live into a dream right now, or maybe they're at a place where they're stuck or
Yeah.
complacent or confused? Any maybe parting encouragements or, yeah, things you'd
Yeah.
share with them?
I want to share this because it was so powerful to me. When Jack and I were first married, we really struggled because me moving to West Michigan was not easy. I left everything that I
Mhm.
knew, and he was
Still dreads or no?
no,
No dreads.
no, no,
Okay.
no, no,
Okay.
no. I
Yeah.
was,
Dreadless.
I
Yeah.
looked a lot different then. I looked pretty normal, whatever that looks like. But um, but we struggled a lot,
Mm.
and I was kind of mad at God because I said, God, I
What's
was
going
here.
on?
I was
Yeah.
here. I wanted to go out and save the world. I was
Mhm.
really ready to go anywhere, and now you bring me to West Michigan, and here and Jack and I were just working and living, and there's nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just struggling with
Mhm.
this, and
Mhm.
and this was I was struggling, and and I can remember just sitting there, just letting God know I was ready to go. And God doesn't speak to me all the time. And usually when he speaks to me, he doesn't have to say much.
Mhm.
And he said to me, Kathy, you are willing to give your life to people that you don't know. But are you willing to give your life to the man that I died on the cross for, that you're married to? And it just changed
Mm.
my whole perspective of how am I loving the people that God has given me.
Mm.
And sometimes we look beyond thinking that, we're
Missing out.
we're
Or
missing out,
yeah.
where the Lord has given us
Mhm.
people that he loves
Mhm.
right in, right in our hand.
Yeah.
And how are we loving them well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing so much.
Yeah.
So much good. So much good.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this conversation. Hope it was helpful and encouraging as you live and dream with God. We'll continue them, and we'll see you really soon. Thanks for watching.